There's really no way to overestimate the challenge faced by the first president of this university, Dr. Steele, in that he was up against some really tough competitors for funding. Everybody needed money for higher education in the 1970s, and the existing regional universities were obviously protective of their budgets and feared if Northern came along with its handout that there'd be less for them. So Dr. Steele had to do a tremendous selling job down in Frankfurt to get what money he could for campus expansion and campus programs. The other problem, of course, was that we were a trending Republican area of Kentucky at a time when most of the rest of the Commonwealth was heavily Democratic. So that created some political tensions that stood in our way frequently. But Dr. Steele persevered, and funding eventually was available for the rest of the campus construction to get underway. And ultimately, of course, Dr. Steele's name was memorialized in the library, which was, I think, the third major academic building after Nunn Hall, and the science building, now Founders Hall, were constructed. The faculty coming from all over the world brought with them different expectations of academic administration. And Dr. Steele and some of the other administrators came from Kentucky and the Upper South tradition of academic administration. And tensions, of course, developed. This was, after all, a generation of young academics who had come out of universities in the 1960s. I, for instance, was from the University of California, Berkeley as an undergraduate, where the free speech movement had originated. And there were expectations of how shared governance should exist, which were sometimes at odds with the more executive approach of traditional academic management in Kentucky. So those early years had some contentious moments when faculty and administration were at odds with each other over issues to do with how tenure was created and defined, as well as the sharing of power in other respects as well. But in the end, Dr. Steele's contribution is permanent and incredibly important. And when we look at the building that bears his name, the library, and think about how his vision of this place was eventually realized, we have to give him all the recognition that is due. And sadly, towards the end of his life, after having retired from the presidency and had a very active time as professor of history in my department, he retired from the university and became a victim of Alzheimer's. And it was sad to think that in his last years, he was unable to understand how his dream had become reality. And it was a source of great sorrow that his ability to understand his achievement was compromised in his final years. After Dr. Steele stepped down as president, he was replaced for a year by an interim president, Dr. Ralph Tessanier, who had been chief academic officer of the university to that time. And it was in that interval that the legislation authorizing us to become a university was passed. And that was an important moment, obviously. We had gained already a graduate program when Chase Law School amalgamated with Northern in 1972. But by 1976, we were developing a master's program in education, and not long afterwards, we'd develop a master's in business administration as well. So the time was right for us to move from being a four-year college to being a multi-purpose university with both undergraduate and graduate programs. And of course, that has been such an important feature of our expansion and development since 1976. In 1977, a new president was selected who had enormous experience in Frankfurt. Dr. A.D. Albright had served as the administrator at UK and also on the Council on Public Higher Education. And it was useful to have a man with such a lot of ties to the existing power structure in Frankfurt to come on board as president. And the result of that was seen in a kind of building boom that occurred on campus, with various structures, including the one that bears his name, the Albright Health Center, being built between 1979 and 1984. Also, while he was president, he implemented a kind of decentralization of academic administration, creating the College of Arts and Sciences in 1977, whose first dean was Dr. Lyle Gray, And also, of course, at that time, Chase Law School moved over from the Covington campus into a renovated Nunn Hall and became an important component of the Highland Heights campus at that time. The proliferation of colleges continued with the College of Professional Studies being created also in 1977, focusing more on a kind of vocational kind of education for particular niches in the economy like aviation. And then ultimately in 1985 we had a College of Business created with the Masters in Business Administration and a separate administrative structure as well. This was typical of Dr. Albright, who was in a sense professionalizing NKU to accommodate the increased number of students, increased number of faculty and administrators. And it was an important step to create structures appropriate to our growth and the growth of new programs as well. Dr. Albright retired in 1983, and his replacement was Dr. Leon Booth, who remained in office until his retirement in 1996. Dr. Booth's years are associated with continued expansion of the campus physically, but also a concerted effort to link Northern more closely to the local community. It was Dr. Booth who really took the initiative in expanding the NKU Foundation to be a major link to local corporations and agencies. And at a time of decreasing state funding for higher education, it became more and more essential to develop funding support from local entities. And the foundation became the means of accomplishing that. And Dr. Booth had a wonderful way of relating to people in the community and was very adept at converting Northern from the image that unfortunately many local people, especially north of the Ohio River, had had before this of NKU as no-knowledge college, into something that the local area could really be proud of, and that was serving all kinds of diverse needs, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and was an engine of economic progress and generally of cultural advancement as well. So Dr. Booth's development or cultivation of community links was really another important step forward for the university. When Dr. Booth retired in 1996, he followed the Steele pattern of becoming an active member of the History and Geography department and was involved in teaching very popular courses for us for many years, and indeed remains active on the campus today, coming back from many campus events and keeping track of us in the History and Geography department. So that's a nice tradition. His replacement, of course, was Dr. Jim Votruba, who came to us with a new mission, and that was civic engagement. And through his leadership has been instrumental in creating for Northern a national reputation as an exemplar in the field of community engagement. And this process of each president sort of taking us to a new level of accomplishment and importance is really been a very gratifying thing to observe. And now as we face the end of Dr. Votruba's presidency and are thinking about our new leader to come, we're hopeful, of course, that that new leader will continue that pattern of taking us on to greater accomplishments and more significance, both here locally and also nationally as well. It's a great tradition that has been established through our presidents over the last 40 years.